I guess that means the bell's going to ring again. I don't know. Oh well. Alright, today we're going to talk about how to solve using square roots. So sometimes when you have two terms, we've learned like, oh hey, I can take this, that's a difference of two squares. I can just factor that and solve from there. Now you could, that's not wrong. There is another way, and maybe a shorter way, I don't know, to solve this. And so when given just two terms, you can just add the constant over to the other side to try to get the variable by itself. So I'm going to add this 16 over to both sides. So I'm left with 9x squared is equal to 16. Well, to get x squared by itself, you would divide then both sides by 9. This fraction does not reduce, so you get x squared equals 16 over 9. Now, how do you undo a square? By taking the square root. So the last video you watched should have been talking about how to simplify radicals. If I take the square root of both sides, I have to take the square root of the entire fraction, top and bottom. I realize I said top and bottom. You know what I meant. So x equals, anytime I take the square root, I need to say plus or minus. Class is over. Now, what is the square root of 16? Do we have a number that multiplies to 16? That's the same. And we do, it's 4. 4 times 4 is 16. And what are two numbers that multiply to 9 that are the same? And that would be 3. So actually, we get two solutions. We knew we were going to get two solutions because we have an x squared. My first solution is that x is a positive 4 over 3. My second solution is that x is a negative 4 over 3. So these are our two solutions. You can leave it like that. You don't have to say 4 over 3, comma, negative 4 over 3. You can just leave it as plus or minus. Okay, you may have noticed that this problem changed. It changed magically because I had to crop it out because I made a mistake. So imagine that. Go Tigers. Anyway, moving forward, what you're going to see is that with number 2, we're going to get a radical in the denominator. And so we have to rationalize the denominator, which all that means is we can't divide by radicals, so we have to get that square root or that radical out of the bottom. So I'll show you how to do that. This is not a difference of two squares, so this will not work out as easily as the others. So we're going to subtract 16 from both sides, and we get 3x squared equals negative 16. From here, we're going to divide by 3, so undo multiplying by 3 by dividing, and we get x squared equals a negative 16 over 3. Okay, so I want you to pay attention here. We take the square root to get rid of that square. When we take the square root of something, we always do our plus or minus. Don't forget that. So when I have to undo a square by a square root, I always use plus or minus. There's my two answers. That's where my two answers come from, the positive something and the negative something. Now let's do this really slowly. We're taking the square root of the top and the bottom. What is the square root of the top of our fraction? Well, the square root of that is 4. So on the top of our fraction, I'm going to have a 4. I don't know what the square root of 3 is, so I have to leave the square root of 3 in the bottom. Okay, so far, square root of 16 is 4. That was on the top of our fraction in our numerator. So it stays in the top. Square root of 3 in the bottom, I don't know what that is. It doesn't simplify, it doesn't reduce. So I leave that in the bottom. Now, I ignored this negative. When we take the square root of a negative, remember, that gives us an imaginary number, so we have to have our I out. Now, we can put the I in front. You can put the I behind the fraction. It doesn't really matter, whatever you prefer. However, we're not done because you cannot divide by radical 3. You can't divide by square root. So we need to get rid of that, and how we get rid of that is multiplying top and bottom by that exact square root. And I'll show you why. You'll see why that is why you do that. Let's go ahead and write what we have. So x equals plus or minus. Now, when we multiply fractions, we multiply straight across the top, straight across the bottom. 4 times the square root of 3. That's kind of like saying 4 times x. It's just 4x. So a number times the square root, they just get attached. And so what happens is I have a 4 with my I, so 4i, times the square root of 3. So now the I is attached to the 4. We're going to write 4i square root 3. So pull the I out because of the negative. 4 times square root of 3 is 4 radical 3. That I is going to belong to the 4. So naturally we write the variables, the letters, after the numbers. And this is all over. What happens here, the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is technically the square root of 9. But we know what the square root of 9 is. The square root of 9 is 3. So what happens is anytime you multiply a square root times itself, the square roots go away, and it's just the number that was underneath that radical. And so the square root of 3 times square root of 3, square roots go away, and I'm left with a 3 on the bottom. Now, this is your answer, so please do not think that this 3 under the square root simplifies or reduces or cancels out with this 3 in the bottom. You cannot simplify a number under a radical with a number that is not under a radical.